This program was originally broadcast March 1988.
A salute to the Alaska Native Brotherhood. Host Vern Metcalfe explores the past, present, and future of the oldest Native American organization in the country. The ANB celebrated its 75th anniversary last year after being founded in Juneau in 1912. In this series, you'll meet and hear from some of the many men and women who helped build the Alaska Native Brotherhood.
We have as our guest here today a man who has a real interesting career in Alaska, who passed his 79th birthday in Sitka during the ANB convention. I note that only because he seems quite a bit younger to me. This is the Reverend Dr. Walter Soboleff, who for years was a Presbyterian pastor here in downtown Juneau, and is, I'd say, semi-retired isn't the proper word because he keeps very busy, very active, and now lives in Teneke, but he commutes between Juneau and Teneke, I believe. I wanted also to note that he has been the president of the Grand Camp, I believe, a record 7 times. Am I correct there, Walter? Well, this is radio, so you just can't nod your head, you know, with me here.
Can they hear my nodding?
Yeah. You were, if I'm not mistaken, weren't you born in Killisnoo?
Yes, Killisnoo, Alaska.
Which is no longer in existence.
An abandoned village just a few miles south of Angoon, Alaska.
Well, let's go back now. I know that you were raised there, and you went to school in Sitka, and you became, in due time, a pastor. But let's go back to those early days. Now, you go back a long ways with the history of Alaska, also prior to the founding of the Alaska Native Brotherhood. But you were just an infant, I guess, at that time. But you knew many of the people who were the founding fathers, that dozen or so, including Peter Simpson. Would you go into some of the history?
Yes, I'll go back a little, just a few years later than that. I happened to get my school start in Killisnoo, Alaska, and then my parents decided I should go to this Russian school in Sitka, and I went there in 1917 on the mail boat Prince of Wales, which stopped in Killisnoo, and I could still see my father standing on the dock talking with the passenger to tell him to keep an eye on me, because I was a little fellow on my way to Sitka to attend this Russian school. And I heard someone say a while back that he was the last student to attend this Russian school, and I think I happened to be the last student.
Well, you have Russian antecedent there with a name like Soboleff, right?
That Russian school in Sitka. And back to, I had a year there, and we had 1 hour of Russian classes, and then from 8 to 9, and then from 9 we went to the public school. However, bringing us to the founders of Alaska Native Brotherhood, I had the privilege of knowing and meeting with them and talking with them, or in fact listening to them, Ralph Young, William Hobson, Eli Kadanook, Frank Price, Chester Worthington, James Johnson, Paul Liberty, Seward Coons. These fellows were, of course, the pillars of the Alaska Native Brotherhood. And then I had my grade school and high school at Sheldon Jackson School at that time, back from the early 20s, and I finished high school there in 28. And then came back to Sitka and decided I should join the Alaska Native Brotherhood. So my membership to date runs like 51 years.
Mm-hmm.
I took 7 years off to go to undergraduate school and graduate school, and so I have a total of 51 years membership in the Alaska Native Brotherhood. I have held membership in the Sitka Camp, the Angoon Camp, Juneau Camp, and then helped organize the Teneke Camp, which is Camp number 76. And on the camp level served as secretary and then president, and on the Grand Camp level served as sergeant-at-arms, treasurer, secretary, and then president. also served on their scholarship committee. And then in between that time also served on the Tlingit and Haida Central Council as their treasurer. I recall attending some of the ANB conventions, traveling from Sitka on a fishing boat to Ketchikan, a seiner, and then from Juneau to Klawock on the fish packer, and then from Juneau to Heidelberg on the church boat, also from Juneau to Cake on the church boat, and Sitka to Yakutat on a steamer, and to date, most of us travel by jet or prop planes.
You do a lot of flying between here and Tennessee, I imagine. You're on the board of directors of the Sealaska Corporation as well, are you not?
Yes, I am.
And you've been there for a long, long while.
Yes, I'm on my second term.
And among many activities, one thing I like to do is turn the calendar back a ways, and that's how you wound up going to divinity school in Dubuque, Iowa. That's a story in itself, I believe.
Yes, it is. I remember as a high school student, I was examining various careers to apply my life to, and I wanted to become a medical doctor, and so I don't think I was that great a scholar, but I had that ambition anyhow. So right after high school, I went to Oregon State College for my pre-med, to chemistry and physics and German and other related subjects. And after one semester, I ran out of money, but made not the best grades in the world, but I made it. And then that was right in the midst of the Depression, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The Depression hit in 29, and there I was stranded in Seattle.
A lot of people got stranded in a lot of different places during that Great Depression. And then you came back to Sitka, did you not?
Yes, I came back to Sitka and landed there with 35 cents in my, didn't have a wallet, just had a pocket, and that's what it is. But I landed among friends, and that was wealth.
That was wealth. Well, friends are always a wealth. You are unlike, you had 2 cents less than Wally Heckel when he came up here. I heard it was 37 cents with him, but, oh, that's a little sidelight there. But nevertheless, Walter, then you went to work, and I believe that somebody convinced you that you should go on to become a minister or to get your college education back east or in the Midwest.
Yes, we were fortunate to get a job in Sitka in what was then called the Booth Fisheries. That's a site now of the Sheffield Hotel right just below the Pioneers Home in Sitka, and we worked there 5 years. The great daily salary was $5 a day for 8 hours, and that was pretty good money. And
that was good money.
You could buy a pair of good overalls, and you could buy a pair of rubber boots, and many other things for for that kind of money.
Well, how did you come about to go back to wind up in Dubuque, going to college?
Well, I wanted a glamorous career like most every young fellow wanted, not that much money, but an exciting career. And one day the church pastor said to me, Walter, have you ever thought of becoming a minister in the church? And I said, absolutely no, there's no fun in that. I want something with fun. So he left it at that. And it seemed that from the day he asked me, for probably 30 days, it seemed like there was a big sign on my door, well, Walter, how about it? They just kept hounding me. I finally went down to see this fellow and I said, well, Pastor, I think I'll give it a whirl. If I don't make it, I won't make it. If I make it, I'll make it. And about a month or so afterwards, he came back to me and said, well, Walter, we managed to get you a 4-year scholarship at the University of Dubuque. That is in the midst of Depression. That is a grand prize. And so I worked all that summer being fireman in a sawmill, and I hurried and got me a little set there were companies that were selling men's suits, and I got a kit and read up on how to measure for suits, and I sold several suits, and I earned enough money to pay my way to Dubuque, Iowa. I went by bus from Seattle to San Francisco and then across the continent. for $39.95. I remember plunking on the counter $40, and I got a nickel back.
Boy, that's quite a trip. Well, how come you had to go to San Francisco to get to Dubuque? That's an interesting story.
Well, that's another of a boyish ambition to see San Francisco, and just for a few dollars I could see San Francisco, and I was so dog-tired when we got there. I checked in at a hotel and slept for 6 hours and caught the next bus out to Iowa.
Well, at any rate, you saw the Golden Gate, and that was probably before the bridge was even built,
Yes,
right?
the Golden Gate. They were just putting down the footings of the Golden Gate. I remember we were taken across on one of those big ferries.
Yeah, I remember coming in there in January 6, 1946, coming back from Okinawa, and I figured out it was early in the morning, and the sun came up over the mountains there, and that's why they called it the Golden Gate. It was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. Getting back to the United States for one thing. After you went to Dubuque, did you stay there during the summers, or did you come back?
No, I came back, managed to come back every summer. The first summer I hitchhiked from Dubuque to Seattle. I remember the hitching wasn't very good, and I had a lot of hiking. But one morning I was out trying to hitchhike, and a farmer was coming into town with his family. There was no room in the car, so he stopped, and he said, "If you don't mind, you could lay on the fender." In the days they had big wide fenders.
Oh, yeah.
Fine. So I laid on the fender, and we came into one of the little Iowa farm cities.
I was thinking that back when I was a boy there in Wenatchee, Washington, instead of human beings, they'd always have a mule deer on that fender, you're talking about. And since mule deers ran a couple of 100 pounds, why they needed pretty wide fenders. But that's a little bit of history there, too. But did you ride steerage back and forth on the steamships in those days?
Well, to continue with the hitchhiking got pretty rough, and one of the fellas in the jungles saw me, and he said, "Are you pretty new to this?" I says, "Yeah, I don't know very much." "Well, you better stay with me. I'm going to Astoria, Oregon. Why don't you stick with me?" And I'm hopping freight, so I stayed with him, and I got to Astoria, Oregon on a freight.
You rode the rods.
Yeah, we went over the Rockies, and I thought of that when it's springtime in the Rockies. When it's springtime in the Rockies, it isn't that good. It was pretty cold. I nearly froze going over the
More
Rockies.
than one child of the Depression
In the
really froze
springtime.
riding the rod. You mentioned the jungles. You're talking about the Hobo jungles, right? Where
Right.
people would overnight and
Right.
cook coffee in a coffee can or even stew or whatever. So you knew all firsthand about that.
Well, I just skirted that area. I didn't get into it. I just went by the edge, but I heard of it.
Yes, okay. And then you got your degree. You came back to Alaska to become a Presbyterian minister.
Well, we happened to go the full 4-year route of the undergraduate school, as it is called, and then 3 more years on top of that for the graduate degree in theology. But I majored in education. My undergraduate degree was in education, and then in the graduate degree I went into Christian ed.
Did you do any teaching, Walter?
Not especially in the strictest sense of the word, I didn't, but the field I entered eventually was really teaching.
Yes, I've heard him teach from the pulpit more than a few times. When did you come to Juneau and take over the Memorial Presbyterian Church?
Sometime about June the 10th, 1940.
That was a year before I came here, almost to the day. I think we arrived here on June the 10th, 41. And that church, of course, no longer exists, but I remember you had a kind of a mixed group of people there. There were both Native and white people in that church, and Jimmy Madsen, for one, comes to mind, and I remember going down there. In fact, my first acquaintance with the Reverend Dr. Walter Soboleff was when I hit a foul ball that took out one of his windows in that church, the old ballpark being right alongside of it there where the federal building is now. You were there for a number of years, and then finally, what did they do, merge the churches here?
Well, not especially. Back to those good old ball days. We were one of the old-fashioned churches in the city here. We had a bell, and that bell rang every Wednesday and every Sunday. including, of course, the prayer meeting, which you hardly hear of today.
That's right.
It was the church structure was beautiful. It was called the modern Gothic, and it was a churchy-looking structure, and we took a lot of pride in that. In fact, I happened to be the first full-time pastor in this new building. It was a new building, completely new. It had beautiful flooring, well furnished, and then as the congregation grew, we had to excavate the basement and add that whole basement to the building, or improve the basement so that we could use it for a recreation hall. We had a fireplace down there and had many good parties.
It was a marvelous structure. And I admired the architecture, and there's so much of this modern day architecture that I could do without, but this building, it looked like a church, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yes.
And that's now the site of, the fire station's about where.
Yes.
The downtown fire station. Boy, that part of town has changed a trifle, hasn't it, Walter?
Yes, it really has changed, very much so.
Well, you married after you came back to Sitka. You have 3 sons and a daughter.
Yes.
And some grandchildren, I know. And your late wife was originally from Heidelberg?
Yeah, she was born in Haa Shagoon, Alaska.
Which is where?
That's a few miles from Heidelberg, and many of the Heidelberg folk moved from Haa Shagoon to establish Heidelberg.
His son Sasha was quite a basketball player during the time I was announcing. He's got a real good story about Walter Jr. in my announcing days. You mind repeating that one? I thought it was really hilarious.
Yes, well, my son Walter Jr. was an avid listener to the local radio station, and I don't know where he got his little transistor from, probably a Christmas present from Santa Claus, and he always had this on, and always had it on. One day he had his room upstairs, and he came down somewhat ired, to say the least, and he said, "My transistor's all broken up," he said. "Vern Metcalfe wore it out."
I was accused of many things during those days, but that was the most unique one I ever heard. And, of course, your Ross is with the Sealaska Corporation as their communications director. Walter is here in town, and your daughter just came back, did she not?
Yeah, she just came back about the 11th of July.
She's a beautiful lady, and is she the oldest? Or
Yes, she's the oldest.
And then there's Sasha, Ross, and
Walter Jr., and then Ross.
Oh, I see. Okay, I got the that sort of. At any rate, you raised this large family. Your wife passed away about 2 years ago, I believe, but you were married for what, some 40-some years?
Yes, about 46, 47 years.
And it was quite a romance, as I recall, when you first met her in Sitka. And was she going to Sheldon Jackson?
Yes, she went to Sheldon Jackson, and then was awarded a scholarship to a nursing school in Arizona, and there she completed her training, and being quite an avid student in languages, she learned to speak the Navajo language and learned it well enough that she could translate for the doctor when the Navajo patients came in. She was translating for the patients.
So she had a flair for languages then.
Very, very much so.
Did she speak Haida?
Haida.
And did she pick up any Tlingit?
And then she picked up Tlingit, and Ben Len, who often stayed with us, was Chinese.
I remember him.
And she was picking up Chinese.
I think a lot of people remember Ben.
And then when we were in Fairbanks for 3 years, we mixed in with the Inupiat Eskimos, and she was singing in the Eskimo choir.
That's something else again. There were very few people could accomplish all of that, all those languages, good heavens. And I know Inupiat. I have problems just with a few Tlingit words I know, I can imagine. And I worked for the North Slope Borough at one time, so I have some idea that is not an easy language. None of them really are. Navajo or Athabascan, are they not, by origin?
Well, Navajo and Athabascan are really similar.
Yeah.
They come from the same linguistic stock.
Yeah, okay. I remember a lady in the Navajo Indian that was up here for the Department of U.S. Office of Education one time, was much startled. She was in Minto and could understand two elders that were carrying on a conversation there, so that She said she couldn't believe it. She was from New Mexico. Walter, I'd like to cover your time as over the years, your association with the Alaska Native Brotherhood. This is something that you've seen all the history that they've been involved in. What do you think of the major accomplishments? And you had a hand in every one of them, I'd think.
Well, we all worked as a team, and I would be presumptuous to say that I did this and I did that as some of the outstanding things in the Alaska Native Brotherhood. It was all a united effort, and I just happened to be president of the organization for a few times, and the delegates had a lot of concepts, a lot of ideas, and the various communities were supportive of all the movements that the Alaska Native Brotherhood entered, and so indeed, again, I would be presumptuous to say during my term we did this and we did that. It was all the people doing it, and I just happened to be president.
How about an overview then?
Well, I remember one time, not one time, several times, those conventions are hard-working groups. I remember we often had over 200 resolutions.
Whoop-de-doo.
Over 200 resolutions, and that seems to have been a normal run. And then our convention thought of recognizing various members and friends of the organization, and then an awards program came in. And to date, over 200 awards have been given to various folk, including members. And then, due to the Native Traditional Society, which was matriarchal, meaning that women folk were the controlling unit of family traditions, the women folk, to my opinion, are still Alaska Native Brotherhood's strength. It is certainly a tribute to the sisterhood that the Alaska Native Brotherhood stands today as one of the oldest American Native organizations on the continent of America. And we're proud to have women to be our backers, the supporters of the Alaska Native Brotherhood. And I say it without any mental reservation. Were it not for their ambition, their encouragement, the Alaska Native Brotherhood wouldn't have made its 75th year, and we honor them. The various units called camps were organized in each community covering southeast Alaska, now going up to Anchorage. We also had units in Kotzebue, and a unit in Barrow, a unit in Copper Center, and these have more or less fallen by the wayside or probably on the edge of being revived again. And we have units in Seattle and a unit in California. In 1929, the Alaska Native Brotherhood in the convention decided that they should do something about land ownership, and that's when it all started. Imagine petitioning or sending a resolution to Congress demanding that something be done about their land. How did they do this? Each village, each community would raise money. In fact, a committee would be appointed to go to each house asking for donations, 50 cents, a quarter, $1, or whatever. And I could remember some families saying, this 25 cents is for my son, this 25 cents is for my daughter, and when it was all put together, there was a little amount to help pay for the fare of our representatives who would be sent to Washington. And this is how it started. And I admire the ambition of the people. It was following a tradition of the culture. There was a tremendous amount of self-determination. There was pride and honor and integrity. And that was one of the elements that made this possible. Also, there was a breakdown in the Tlingit culture as regards their tribes and their clans, the Eagle tribe, the Raven tribe, and their clans. And the Alaska Native Brotherhood seemed to have just brought the people together where at one time, according to tradition, each unit was sufficient unto its own. But now in the Alaska Native Brotherhood came it brought these two together to work in a united manner.
It wasn't easy.
And even today, it seems that these people are still standing together in a beautiful way.
And, of course, you've been involved in a lot of that, including the founding of the Tlingit and Haida Central Council, and I noticed you mentioned you'd been on that. All of this is, excuse me, extremely interesting. We're trying to cover the history of this in a series of things. I'd like to continue with you, Dr. Soboleff, in another of these type of broadcasts, because you've lived so much of this history. You're so articulate about it. I imagine that in part comes from your years on the pulpit. Did you since you ended your association with Memorial Church when it went down, I guess under the wheels of progress or whatever, what has been your association with the church since that time?
Well, the church since then has grown stronger, it appears, in Southeast Alaska. We had a shortage of clergy, and every now and then I'd get calls to serve here and there. There would be a death in a community, and I'd be called to come down, even when I wasn't on an active status. And now with most of our churches well occupied, or the pulpit supplied, as it's called, now the burden has eased for me.
I noticed one thing with a great deal of interest is that I went to a number of funerals in the past year, and most of them have been in the Presbyterian Church, and invariably you are there. Do you get a lot of calls that way?
Yes, I do, and I usually wish to defer to the local pastor, but they seem to, the pastor agrees with the family that I should be the one to be the...
Too frequently those pastors haven't been here all that long, and you have. And incidentally, he does probably as good a job as anyone I've ever heard in these very trying circumstances, and he's known these people for years in most cases, so it's rather interesting. The Reverend Dr. Walter Soboleff has been our guest here today, and I'm going to do one more with him.
No, I'll do one more.
All right.
I remember when we had Memorial Church, we used to have a half-an-hour broadcast of our Sunday morning worship, and that was exciting.
I'll bet.
We were perhaps one of the few services in this area that shared in a live broadcast to the communities. We were listened to up to the Yukon Territory, up to Yakutat, and most of Southeast Alaska.
That's great. And he also used to do a Tlingit news broadcast, if I'm not mistaken, in Tlingit.
Yes.
That was, I didn't understand it, but I found it fascinating. You did it on KJNO, and in the basement of the Baranoff.
This is the way it sounds. Agoya Junior Tlingit Enakakanahu Ohatangan Yakanahu Idat Kotsesach Achatreha Ajej Kwatani that can see Edisa Ache Walter Yachat.
Gone cheese, I understood. That's thank you in Tlingit. I'd like to thank you again, Walter, for being our guest here today, and we'll hear more from him before these series of broadcasts are terminated. In the meantime, Vern Metcalfe, on behalf of the 75th anniversary of the Alaska Native Brotherhood.
Production of this program is made possible through a grant from the Sealaska Corporation, covering Southeast Alaska, and from Haa Shagoon Corporation, covering Sitka.